Good morning, everybody. I'm here with Steve Willis. He's our guest today, along with, of course, John Mayo.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, guys, we're so glad you're here to join us. We have a discussion today. I think is going to be maybe potentially slightly uncomfortable. It's certainly we're going to get into some of the dark stuff of humanity, but at the same time, I hope we're going to land with what good is coming of that. And so, of course, on the Grit Theory, we're about facing the difficulties. We're about looking at things that are uncomfortable. We've called it before looking in the mirror, and sometimes we don't like what we like. And we're looking in the mirror of humanity today, where there's some things in the mirror that are pretty stinking ugly. But the great thing is that we don't have to stay there. And there's some things that we can do to combat that. So we've invited Steve Willis, who has sat front row to some pretty crazy things, but we're more here to talk about a film project called Nefarious that Steve has been a part of. So, Steve, welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Nefarious' full name is Merchant of Souls, which is a very provocative title. Merchant of something to sell souls. And we're getting into the sex trafficking conversation here. What's going on in the world? And I gotta admit, before I saw this film, I thought sex trafficking was something that happens far away in countries that I've never heard of or can't pronounce, and it's a minority thing. It's it's not happening very much. But as I watched the show, I was just shocked by the statistics on how pervasive this industry has been. Steve, before we get into the film, kind of tell me what your background is and maybe how you kind of got involved with this.
Okay. I've been in the creative media industry since I finished school back in Cincinnati. I've been a video camera guy. I was a video editor for a long time, then got into graphic design. And then with the advent of camera gear, like photography gear, making the switch to pro level gear, I stumbled into photography as a career. The Canon 5Ds also functioned as video cameras, and it kind of opened up all kinds of opportunities for me creatively as a result. And because of that, and the reputation that I had in Kansas City as a photographer, I got invited to be a part of the film crew for Nefarious, Merchant of Souls.
And this is about probably 12 years ago or so, or we're not sure about that. And it's been out there. John, you recently saw the film too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a quick thing I just want to shamelessly plug your photography. I've seen the pictures you've done of Aaron, and how you make him look good is honestly just miraculous, because that's an uphill fight. How many lenses did you break when you had to take pictures of him?
Well, appreciate the kind words, but Aaron wasn't that bad.
Okay. Well, so no lenses broken. That's a little unfortunate.
Steve's a great leader. Yeah, he very patiently said, "Aaron, stop it. Aaron, stop it."
So the good news is, though, both through the movie and through pictures I've seen you do amazing work. So thanks for sharing that, and really glad you're here. I think what I'm excited about with this conversation and how we've teed it up, Nefarious, Merchant of Souls, and what that's going to cause us to focus on, is there's a very dangerous naivety in our culture that's based on the comfort and the security and the abundance that we have that will be challenged today. Like, if you believe that people are naturally predisposed, thank you so much. It's hard to be dumb, to good, right? To be predisposed to be good. That's false. And the proof is in the pudding. All you have to do is open your eyes and travel the world, and you'll see that what is miraculous is that we're capable of good, but we're predisposed to pretty terrible things. And I've been familiar with that darkness for a long time, and the movie Nefarious, Merchant of Souls, I thought beautifully captured the genuine rawness of some of the worst of what we do. The fact that slavery is still alive and well in our country, not to mention the rest of the world, right under our noses, is something that if it doesn't send shivers down your spine and predispose your mind to start looking for ways to act, that's scary to me. It ought to. It ought to. So that's kind of my take from the start.
Yeah.
Like, I hope this is either a wake-up call or a reminder, because there's many who listen to this who I know how the world works. And for me, that's what it was. It was another thing. It was kind of like going for a run in a blizzard, right? Don't get soft. Don't let your mind weaken. Remember what is right next to you and be a force for good against it. So that's kind of where I'm coming in swinging on this one.
Yep. The topic is extremely important. We're not going to be localized in this conversation. This is a global pandemic, really, of slavery that's happening. I remember Steve, one time we were very casually, we were sitting at a table with a bunch of guys, and we were kind of asking about, hey, what other countries have you been? And typically, most Americans are going to say a few other countries outside. And then I get to you, and you just kept talking about so many countries and so many cities as you've been, largely as a part of this project, I think. Or is there other? Or are you just that well traveled? You've been all over the place.
No, it's connected to my career in photography. I never thought photography would open up the doors it has and provided world travel, but I've been to 23 countries now, pretty extensively throughout the Middle East, being a part of film projects even outside of Nefarious. With Nefarious itself, I went to 12 different countries, Northern Europe, Southeast Asia, a lot of travel domestically, and then down south we were in Costa Rica. At the start, I'd share that with others that I traveled a lot, and it kind of sounds glamorous, but my introduction to international travel was mostly just seeing the sexual underbelly of the nations and just rampant perversion. And I was not a tourist. I was working, and we were just hearing horror stories.
It was like the exact opposite of what tourism is. Like, tourism is like, show me the best you got. You go, hey, we're going to the worst these cities have to provide. You're kind of looking at it. And that's kind of my question is, why? Why did this project come to be? Why would somebody, that's a really hard, long stare at a very difficult subject. And you and I have talked off air about how it makes you lose your taste for anything sexual at all because of how absolutely evil it is to look and stare at. That's a hard journey to walk down.
Well, it is, and one of the side effects of even being a part of the film that I wasn't expecting is that I actually after coming back home from our time in Northern Europe, I actually saw my own sex drive kind of go down. I'm grateful for a healthy
marriage
and sexual activity within a healthy marriage, but just the stories that we hear where sex is being brought so low and just dragged through the mud, it almost made it feel dirty. And you kind of had to get back to a place where, like, oh yeah, this is sex as a gift. It's beautiful. It's intimacy with my wife. But I don't know. Your drive for that was kind of pushed down and weighted from again just stories and sitting before just real young women. We were in Moldova, which is a country that's just kind of a fallout of the old Soviet Union, and we're interviewing a teenage girl, and like so many of the stories of these girls, they're promised work in a foreign country, and then they just get they become sexual slaves. And this young girl just wanted to better her life and find work, and just the most unimaginable things have happened to her. And we're interviewing her, and she has herpes all over her face, like just coming out from around her lips and around her cheeks and chin was just herpes.
Because she'd been treated like chattel day in, day out. This is it's difficult to say, but I mean, dozens and dozens of times, maybe potentially per day, she's like an animal to these men.
Correct.
It's interesting, and in case we weren't clear enough to start, right? Nefarious Merchant of Souls is about modern day slavery, specifically with sex trafficking, right? And it's not racist. It's not race focused, right? It's focused on the disadvantage that can be taken advantage of and put into these situations. And essentially, what slavery is the dehumanization of someone, right? To the place that they're utilized as property, right? So to your comment on chattel, and the fact that is happening today, and with some of the things that we concern ourselves with as a country, instead, is wild to me. But the thing that I really hear with that girl you're talking about is like, here you go. Here's someone who wants to better themselves, and they've been ruined in many ways physically by the herpes, right? That cover their entire face. They have that stigma that they can't even walk into a place without it being apparent. It's like a scarlet letter on their forehead, regardless if they're out of the environment or not, if they escape. And like what specifically in that instance, because you saw tons of girls who all underwent the same thing, tons of children who underwent the same thing, what makes her stand out in your mind more than, or like what makes her come up now, right, with everything you've seen?
Hard to say. Maybe because it was a physical manifestation, on her. Not everybody had, visual evidence of their story upon them. So,
yeah. So the project came together. Why was it that they decided this is something that needed to be said, needed to be filmed and brought attention to?
So a gentleman named Benji Nolo is really the backbone behind this film. Benji Nolo, he heads up Exodus Cry, which is a ministry that was behind making the film, and they've gone on to create other films, and they're going to have another film come out as well, which I think in many ways is more important than the Nefarious film. The next film that they'll release is actually taking on just the pornography industry. Pornography really is what fuels human trafficking.
That's an interesting statement. Stop there for a second. What is that? How so? What's the relationship?
How do I put that into?
You can just say it straight.
Yeah, you don't have to be delicate. It's okay. As I understand it, as you think of this, as I understand it, there's a large portion, more than we want to admit, that the porn industry has used slavery as part of the industry's workers, really. I've heard that. I don't know if you can corroborate that, but
at its core, like Benji would put it this way. Benji uses this phrase all the time, but it's the sexualization and objectification of women, and just reducing women to objects, and they're kind of getting, stripped of their humanity, and it's what pornography, does best. It's such an easy thing for everybody to keep secret and do in the dark. But it's it's just a horrible, horrible problem. But it's where most men that are purchasing sex, they're purchasing because their journey started with porn. Usually, porn is
it's a gateway.
It's the launching pad.
Yeah. Okay.
So I remember from Nefarious, I think it was the detective, I forget the country, she said that to kind of pull on that thread, she made a comment that when men are buying sex, they're not having sex. They're just masturbating with women's bodies.
That was a political leader in Sweden.
Yep.
We were in Sweden because of some of the stance that the Swedes have taken towards prostitution. So we went there to speak with some of their political leaders because Sweden has really embraced that, the idea, the concept that if a woman has gotten to the point where she is selling her body, she should not be the one that is criminalized. The people that should be criminalized are the men that is taking advantage of her vulnerable state. In the States, it's the opposite. We've criminalized. And usually prostitutes will get arrested where it's illegal, but it's the prostitutes that need to be helped and counseled, and they need to be healed. So Sweden is actually criminalizing the men that are taking advantage of women in a vulnerable state.
Wow. There's a real shot at it even across Western civilization. Who the real criminals are, like who's responsible for this.
Well, I think it's really a shot across the world.
Yeah.
Even more so, right? Because if this is happening everywhere,
right,
and it's just either ignored or it's criminalized in some faction, if you're attacking the victims and not the culprits, right? It sounds like Sweden's one of the only places that does that. They attack the culprits. They attack the men, the pimps, the Johns, all them.
Yeah, so prostitution is virtually non-existent in Sweden. I imagine there's underground elements of it, but most of the men that are in bondage to that, they have to go across borders to do it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, one of the things that, like, looking at Thailand, right? Because I think most people have heard of, like, the red light district in Amsterdam and places like that, where you can just walk down and literally window shop for a woman and go in and pay and do that type of stuff, have sex with them or whatever. And there's panic buttons because it's not safe. These girls are getting killed in addition to that, and you could just see when they're interviewing the guy who's owned that business for like 20 years, just the bold-faced lies that he's just saying as he's smiling through his teeth, like, oh yeah, it's safe, oh yeah, I care about them, oh yeah, I do these things. It's like, one, you can see he's telling himself those lies, and because he's like, how do you stomach it? And two, that's just what it is. But then, like, there, it's mostly more grown, right? The women are a little bit older than, say, in Thailand, where, like, it's common practice for like 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds to be sold. That one of the things that really struck me, just especially now revisiting this topic as like a father, was like seeing in Thailand the part where they're talking about all those men who could just wake up and drink beer and smoke cigarettes all day and go back to sleep. And it's like, well, how could they afford that life? It's because they were selling their daughters locally in the same town to grown men, to pedophiles, and to all these types of things. And then they'd come back home each night, and because they were selling them, they were able to just do nothing. And they chose to do nothing despite having the capability to work.
Wow.
And to me, it's just like, I have a bring the sword mentality to those types of things. Some people have the heart to like rescue the children. I have the heart to let's eliminate some of those men. And that's just from my background. I'm not trying to be machismo or nothing. It's 100% like I'm being authentic as heck right now. Like there's no reason you should draw breath if that's how you're going to treat your children. But like looking at that, I just want to peel back the curtain a little bit more on the true ugliness of this, because it's like, okay, you know, I can just hear some individual, for lack of better words at the moment, say, well,
I'm actually going to back you up.
Okay, please.
So I totally understand it's a real typical and natural response for us alpha males, right? To want to fight and bring justice to the innocent, and to bring the sword. But I'm not sure that's the healthiest response for men, because there's another side of it. It's although it's easy to see, the women and the boys that are enslaved, that there's an invisible enslavement that's happening in the hearts of men. And in another way, men just need to be set free themselves. While I was on my journey doing this film, I had a really powerful dream that kind of brought light on that. And in this dream, I'm outside of an apartment complex, and there's a film crew there, and it was and I understood in the dream that it was like the America's Most Wanted television show, and that they were going to record this bust. And in the dream, upstairs was an adult male, and he was with a very young girl that he had just hired for his pleasure, essentially like a prostitute. And I heard the host of the show, talking about how they were getting ready to bust this guy. Little does our John upstairs know that that this girl upstairs is an undercover agent, and she's only 10 years old. And so I go in, and he begins to kind of massage the girl, the John does, and that was enough for them to kind of move in and do a bust. And so in the dream, I remember coming down on this guy, and in the dream, I just wanted to hurt him. I wanted to bring justice. And in the dream, I actually had a bat. And I am just laying into this guy. I'm making sure his knees are getting hurt. He's on the ground. He's like curled up. And I'm making sure that I'm hitting his head. I'm damaging ribs. I'm just in the dream, it kind of felt like, oh, this was satisfying to make this guy pay, right? And then I stopped doing that, and he rolls over to the side. And he's just weeping, and he's weeping. And this understanding came to me in the dream that he was just so full of shame and confusion. He didn't understand how it got to this point in his life, and he felt like he deserved every blow that I was giving him. And I think he was relieved that he got caught. And in the dream, I just understood that, his journey started probably looking at lingerie, and then it got a little bit darker, and then it got a little bit darker, and now he was trying to have sex with kids. And he wanted to get free, but there was so much shame and guilt, and you just feel so dirty. How do you confess this to other people to get free from it? But in the dream, he was actually relieved that the bust came. Yeah. And so he was just on this strange, dark path. And so, the men are in bondage too. And it's so easy to overlook it because we can't see their chains. Mm-hmm. But they're real, and men need help. And as much as we can do to create a movement to help free the obvious bondage that we see with women and children. There needs to be a movement to get men free too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're talking about more of the root of the cause, like where this is all coming from, not just the actions that are coming out. So it's a lot of what we talk about is that, and this is why we're talking about these hard subjects. It's not unlike anything else that we have to look at. Like, hey, these are terrible things that are happening in my mind right now. I need to look at them. Humanity is no different. They have things that they have. We look at them. Why? Because we want to deal with it. We want to get it out. Because I don't want to die. I don't want people to be killed. But at the same time, that justice side, and I think, John, to your point, the immediate reaction is like, it needs to stop right now. No matter what, this can't be repeated ever again. But then it's also like juxtaposed with how do we heal the problem? Because otherwise we're just chasing people all the time.
I really love that you backed me up. Like I love it when people do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just grateful for that.
Chronologically, you backed up.
Well, you backed up and you disagreed, right, with the point I was going.
I like that. Yep.
And I loved that a lot. I don't have much to comment on it because I think that what you said is very valuable, and I don't disagree with it. The only thing I would say, because hearing how you heard what I was saying, when I said that, it's very unemotional.
Mm-hmm.
The bringing of the sword. There's no emotion. There's no desire to hurt. I'm not going to take, I wouldn't take in that solution, there's no injury.
Mm-hmm.
It's execution. It's elimination. It's not punishment. It's not adjustment. It's elimination.
Yep.
And that is from, I've been thinking about that a lot. I don't know how it'll manifest, right? But when you have problems, like it doesn't help to go in and eliminate the John. It doesn't help to go in. You have to find the deeper root. You have to find the head,
mm-hmm.
right, of the issues for it to be impactful. So it's actually the only thing I'd comment to what I was saying, just to provide clarity for the context of our conversation, is when I said that, the place I'm coming from after having thought about these types of issues for a long time and revisiting them over the last week is not an emotional response to inflict pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's a clinical, surgical removing of tumors, which I think is very well counterbalanced and more actionable to be corrected in the light of what you were saying, right? And I think it actually further adds value to what you said, because if you look at it from the equation of, okay, here's a problem, let's clinically remove it. And you're like, yes, that's fair. It's also fair to want to hurt them because you're angry and sickened. And that's where, what you came in with. And it's like, but here's the root of the problem. Everyone here is hurting and broken in some way. And we can do things to help head that off. And it's like, that's where there's real power. And that's what I want to honor and bring back to the point, right? I think that makes sense. How can we help prevent that, right? How can we help prevent that journey down to the point where you have this person who's weeping because they're excited they got caught in your dream of paying to be a pedophile, you know? How can you head that off? And I think that's a much more actionable for many more people, a movement that could be started and actually done. I love the quote that you guys did of Wilberforce at the end, where it's, we don't need casual observers, we need incurable fanatics. And then at the end, the spot that hit me the hardest, and it goes to this directly, or at least in my mind it does, I hope it does when it comes out, is you can choose to look away, but you can never say you did not see. And that's a loose quote. I didn't hit it perfectly, but that, to me, I love it, because even listening to this conversation, if you listen to this conversation, it's news to you that this type of stuff is happening. You can choose to ignore it and bury it, but you can never say you weren't informed. And that's why I love that you stopped me and corrected, and that we're able to kind of delve into what are the responses to this that can be taken, right? Because I'm not in the position to at the moment, I'm not in the position at this exact second to eliminate anything, to act emotionally on anything, if that was the response. There are things, though, I can do to combat it along the lines of what you're saying. You mentioned Exodus Cry. You mentioned that these things are creating movements, right? This thing's not an entertainment film, right? It's a tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Benji, the producer, director of the film, just did an amazing job. But Benji was really stirred by a book called The Natashas. And then he began to kind of dive in and look at other documentaries that were out there, and they were mostly kind of poorly done, and they were mostly kind of just voyeuristic in nature, and
That's
weren't
really counterproductive.
Yeah, kind of wasn't really accomplishing
Right.
anything. And so he was just greatly convicted and said, "Well, I'm going to make a documentary." And Benji had never made a film before. And he gathered this kind of ragtag team.
Those are our kind of people, John.
Yeah.
Just go for it.
So he gathered a ragtag team of guys and took them around the world with just a little bit of equipment. And what Benji accomplished is amazing, having this been his very first film. Because I think it's probably the best documentary out there on the subject, and that ends with some hope. But back to you saying about it being a tool, Benji and his Exodus Cry team have been really deliberate in bringing this film before congressmen and senators and governments in other nations, trying to bring awareness so that nations will change their laws, and that nations will make it harder for criminals to succeed in this. There's a lie out there that Amsterdam bought into, and it was this, that the sex industry is just going to happen anyways. Prostitution's not going away. We should let's make it safe, and let's just legalize sex in our country. And they opened up the red light district in Amsterdam. But it's not really an ethical business. And what happened when Amsterdam opened up the red light district, they basically rolled out a red carpet for organized crime. Because the only people that are wanting to really profit on this are unethical, nasty gangsters. And so when they did that, not only those criminal businessmen didn't just bring the sex industry to that city, but then along with it came drugs and everything else that those type of businessmen just bring along with them.
Right.
And so it just opened up a whole slew of other problems for Amsterdam. And Amsterdam's they're learning. They're slowly changing, and they're shutting down more and more of the windows there. But Amsterdam was actually my introduction. It was the first country we went to. When Benji approached me, he said, I want you on this film crew. You're going to do photography, and video for us. We leave for Amsterdam in 2 weeks. Do you want to go? And I was like, well, I'm in. Let me check with my wife, but I'm pretty sure I'm in. And so, my first introduction to international travel was staying in the red light district for 10 days. Jeez. And, we all had read the book, The Natashas, and we're just kind of mortified by the reality. But then we're in the red light district, and just everywhere is just, women in windows, transvestites in windows, windows selling dildos, live sex acts where you could sit in the theater and see a couple have sex on a stage. It was kind of overwhelming, and to stay there. And so we arrived jet lagged, right? And it's just tense circumstances that we were in just like right away. And so that's how I got baptized into the film.
Well, that's okay. Well, can I back you up for just 1 second? Because to me, like, I know you kind of rushed through that. You know, Benji invited you to this crazy journey, but like, what mentally are you like? How do you prepare yourself? How do you even make that decision? Because I can imagine going to my wife and saying, "Hey, honey, I'm going to go to some of the ugliest, grossest, most profane places in the world. What do you think about that? How did that go down? And what ultimately allowed you to say this is something I need to do?"
Honestly, I was kind of naive, and I was just excited to do
Yeah.
world travel.
Right.
And so I was at first I was excited, and it was life changing in so many ways. Yeah, but then you get there, and then the stories unfold. And I don't know, maybe we just kind of, you kind of put up a little bit of a wall inside your own inner man just to kind of protect yourself. We had teams of people praying for us while we were making the film. I think that was incredibly helpful. I don't think it would have been hard to do it without that.
Well, it's rare that we really get the entire like syllabus is what's going to happen. And we never do really for Big Mission. It's and to be totally honest, like you probably would have run away screaming had somebody gave you the finer points of what you were going to have to endure. You almost were growing along the way as you needed to, being in it, because you didn't know what you were going to expect, what you were going to see, or what you were going to expect, or how you were going to react to certain things. I mean, that's a tough walk. And you say that naivety was challenged.
Yeah, another kind of side effect for me was just fear. I have a boy and 3 girls, and after making the film, like I just watched my daughters like a hawk. And it's just like you didn't even want them to like leave your front yard because you were just so scared of one of your daughters being snatched up, right? Like taking my girls to a mall or something, and if there was an old man on a bench, I'm like, dude, are you a pervert? Are you here scoping out girl? But I was like, no, I can't live under fear.
Kind of ruins your mind.
Yeah. And so it was interesting having to kind of navigate and kind of pray through that so that I wasn't overbearing, overprotective,
sure,
over shelter, my girls. They need to live and experience life. But that was kind of a side effect of the journey, was kind of coming home with just real fear and suspicion of men.
Right. Looking at one little, I guess, dark humor, but a really poor way to deliver this film to your wife. Say, babe, I'm going to go spend 10 days in the red light district in Amsterdam.
Right.
You good with that? Like that without any context would be a little bit troublesome.
Tell me more. Yeah.
I feel like I'm missing a critical point here. But what's interesting on the naivety piece, like I love the honesty of like, yeah, I was excited to get to travel the world with this, and there's no, like, I think this is true for most of the harder, darker sides of humanity, right? Like whether it be combat or dealing with slavery, sex trafficking, extraordinary abuse, a lot of these things that are not good, the depravity of our species, right? There's no true preparation. It's you have to choose to act, and once you're in the situation, you have to choose to do the best you can, and then once you're out, you have to resolve what those effects are. And there's no way to prepare yourself for seeing that stuff genuinely. There's going to have to be some sort of walking through that afterwards, and how are you going to reconcile how you were with who you are and how that's going to affect the future. That's at least been my experience. And that's kind of what I hear in what you're saying.
I'm curious. Like, even ask. Like, I'm thinking, and maybe you've heard this from like fellow soldiers and things. Like, how do you detox when you're going through like that? That would be a really, really crazy thing to. And it's a noble pursuit. Like what you did was fantastic, and what the mission of the film, and how much attention it gave to the subject. But boy, it was born out of a lot of ugly having to look at this stuff and how to produce these things, and the team that put this together. And then you guys all got to come home. The soldier has to come back home to their family, having seen this. What do you do mentally to kind of detox, as it were? How do you get back to a reality where you can live in and want to live in?
Well, looking at what you said, Steve, you came back and you realized, like, okay, you were excited to travel, you go, and it's kind of like the shock. It's high friction, it's ugly, it's overwhelming. You go through it, and you come back, and a secondary effect, aside from experiencing that, is fear. And it sounds like it took you some time to get back to a place of greater normalcy with your daughters. You had to walk through and reconcile that and decide how you're going to behave, which takes some incredible intentionality and facing the effects that it had on you, opposed to just trying to ignore them. What are you thinking? Do you disagree with me again? Because I'm fine with that.
Let's bag it up, John.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Nefarious is a faith-based film,
Mm-hmm.
and the launching pad for Nefarious was actually prayer, and just praying that this would end. But and so that's how I navigated it, was through prayer, and just going to a heavenly Father, and that ultimately does have a solution in the end.
Yep. So how you went into it is how you came out of it. You had the same. You bookended the process.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we heard stories that couldn't even be put in the film. They're too much, too dark. In Thailand, if you have the money and the desire, you can actually be boated out to an island, and there will be a person in a room on that island, and you can do whatever you want to that person. Torture them. You want to know what it's like to experience murdering somebody? You can buy a murder ticket. And there's somebody out there that's just that stuff is happening in the world.
Right.
It's crazy.
And we want to pull up the veil. Like, that's sometimes the easy solution. It's not a solution at all. But mentally, people just go, I just want to look at it.
Yeah.
If I live over here and shut off,
and it's not just the old adage is that it's as long as it's not in my backyard.
Right.
You mentioned Thailand, and you think that's Thailand. But I hate Vegas. I hate Las Vegas. You guys ever been to Las Vegas?
Yeah.
All those cards, you hear those guys flipping
Yep.
women to your door in 15 minutes. That's all human trafficking. And it's like rampant in Las Vegas. I think the decadence of Las Vegas is such a dark city in our own country.
Yeah. It ruins that experience if there ever were a good one, right?
That kind of brings back an idea I had a second ago I was going to ask you about. So that's happening in Las Vegas, right? In broad daylight, right? The cards and the ability to do that. And you'll be able to help me remember who said this in Nefarious, but someone mentioned that organized crime, in order to exist, has to rely on government support in some form or function. Like it is on some form or function, some level of coexistence. Is that ringing any bells?
It doesn't, and it's hard to me. It's harder for me to speak to that stuff well,
Mhm.
because Benji was mostly the researcher.
Okay.
I was the creative. I did lighting and
Yeah.
and you know and took photos. But I'd really encourage people to look up Benji Nolo on YouTube, because he's got some amazing teachings on how to walk in righteousness in a pornified world. And he speaks with such clarity on this. And so not in addition to being a filmmaker, he really is an abolitionist and a fantastic teacher. He's incredibly well read on the subject matter, and he's just a fantastic leader. But just more of those kind of nuances of walking out our own lives as men in a pornified world. Benji speaks to it so well. But his teachings are available.
Excellent. What other action steps out of this film? So we have, check out Nefarious for sure. Like, get your mind ready for it, but it's definitely needs to be seen. Don't close your eyes to it. Certainly check out Benji. Is there any other action steps that you would encourage people?
I don't think I know what you mean by action steps.
Oh, like, just kind of like next steps around, like, instead of being non-responsive to the subject, what is the response that would be best? Do you think that it would be hoped for from somebody who's now aware?
Well, I think Exodus Cry is worthy of financial support. Help them make more movies. It costs money to get movies out and to do them well and pay a staff, but they're mostly missional in what they do, and so they do raise support. So an easy action step is to open up your wallet. often a real heart response is genuine when you can
put money to it.
Release your finances.
Yeah, right.
to combat it. But there's other ministries out there, doing it. Explore them all. But Exodus Cry is just who I know.
Excellent. John, did you have any other thoughts?
No, I think this has been a good conversation. Not easy, but good.
Right.
I've appreciated it a lot.
Yeah. Steve, thank you for being here. Thanks for talking about something that, to revisit and look at and think about again. I'm sure it's not real fun, but I really appreciate you sharing that, your insights, and then also what you have also learned from looking at this difficult subject.
Thank you. You're welcome.